Chapter 11 of Sacrifice Part 2. Rainbow Dash woke with a start. She was in her soft bed of clouds aboard the Argo, wrapped in its warm embrace. The image of Gava standing over her, framed in red, lingered in her mind for only a moment before she blinked it away, replacing it with the dimness of her bedroom. The scratchy scream in her ears gave way to the steady tick of the hull and the low drone of the propellers. She was safe. There was no Gava haunting her aboard the Argo. She rolled over with an irritated grunt and fluffed the cloud up beneath her with a shuffle of her wings before squeezing her eye tightly shut. Minutes passed. She didn't fall asleep. Rainbow fluttered out of the bed with a groan. Sleep had developed a bad habit of evading her lately, but she was never one to surrender easily. A few laps around the ship would wear her out, and then she'd try again. She floated out of her room with a soft flap of her wings, angling herself into a lazy circle. The makeshift sleeping quarters that had been assembled in the cargo hold didn't have any tops, so she could see the dim outline of Applejack sleeping soundly under her sheets. Princess Luna's dark form was harder to make out, but if she squinted, Rainbow could spot the gentle motion of the peaceful alicorn's breathing. Rainbow glided down towards the door, prompting it to open with a short burst of steam. The cargo hold had been dimmed for the night, but the hull lights remained at full strength. She wasted only a few moments stretching her wings out before picking a direction and pumping them. The wind tugged her mane back around her ears, drawing a grin from her and pushing the dark memories to the back of her mind. Here, there were no griffins hanging over her with bloody smirks, or green-coated soldiers falling in flashes of red as fire blazed all around her, or old friends battling the dark magic occupying their minds. There were only her wings and the wind, and the mental stopwatch urging her forwards. She passed by the cargo hold in a prismatic blur. 23 seconds. Not an impressive time for a straightaway, but the curve in enclosed space limited her speed. Still, she could do better. The ship's layout was simple enough. An elongated oval-shaped hallway surrounded the submarine dock on the lower deck, with thin doors running along the outer side that led to the various quarters, workshops, and storage rooms. The door to the cargo hold was the aft end of the loop, and a small observation deck on the forward side doubled as a rec room. The next lap took her only 21 seconds. She knew she could get her time down, but there were ponies sleeping soundly all around her. If she wanted to go faster, to lose herself in the burn of her muscles, she would have to go outside. Opening either of the hatches on the lower level might wake some pony, but there was a hatch on the upper level, further away from any bedrooms. She hovered up the stairs at a quick pace, eager to feel the crisp ocean air between her feathers, and noticed with a small frown that the door to Dusty Tom's shipboard clinic was hanging open. Huh. She flew closer, nose crinkling at the strange smell hanging in the air. It was heavy, with a metallic tint to it, and Rainbow's pulse quickened as she recognized the scent of blood.
Probably just someone hurt themselves and getting patched up,
she assured herself.
Nothing to freak out over. Hey, Dusty.
She kept her voice low as she reached the door. Sea Saber's room was just a few steps down the hall.
Hello?
The prodding joke about eggheads and sleep schedules on Rainbow's mind died in her throat as she turned to the corner to see Dusty Tom sprawled out on his back next to the clinic's bed, his eyes wide in unblinking terror. His old brown jacket was stained a deep red by the trail of blood dripping from the ragged gash in his neck, and she could see glimpses of his exposed guts glistening in the harsh light of the airship through the tears in his belly. A flood of adrenaline rushed through Rainbow's veins. She dropped lightly to the floor to keep her wings free, flaring them wide and suddenly missing the comforting weight of her wing blades, and scanned the room. Aside from the slowly growing puddle around Dusty's body, most of the room was clean of blood, and surprisingly orderly for the site of a recent murder. A murder. The Argo wasn't safe. She backed out of the room until her tail hit the opposite side of the wall, head darting from side to side. The hall was just as empty as it had been before. She needed to raise the alarm, but what if whatever had killed Dusty was still around? What if Gava was on the ship? She looked to the right, and the ticking of the hull turned into the clicking of a revolver's hammer being pulled back behind her. She spun around, taking to the air, only to see more empty hallway.
Calm down, Dash.
She breathed, backing towards the control room with her eye fixed on the stairs.
What have you got to panic about, huh? You're the most awesome thing on this ship. You should be happy if Gava's around. Yeah.
Rainbow stole a glance behind her.
You had her last time. She's nothing.
A heart-wrenching thunk shook the hull, and Rainbow had to bite her lip to keep herself from crying out. With the sound of grinding metal, the ship fell silent. No steady ticking. No propeller drone. The lights dimmed into nothingness. Only the pale beams of moonlight shining through the portholes that lined the hall remained. Gava's grinning, blood-stained beak lingered in Rainbow's mind. The click of a door opening behind her struck Rainbow like a bolt of lightning, and she twisted around with a shout before pouncing for the winged shadow that had appeared before her. It ducked the blow, hooves catching Rainbow in the gut and throwing her to the ground. "Stand down, Rainbow!" Sea Saber hissed. "What's going on?" After a few seconds of stunned confusion, Rainbow's mind finally caught up with the question. She pointed a hoof.
He's dead.
Saber's eyes shot wide open. She whirled, stepping up to the open door to the clinic. Moonlight played against her face as she peered inside, giving Rainbow a clear sight of the way her lip twisted back and her brow furrowed into a hard V. "Who?"
I don't know.
Rainbow stood up, suddenly acutely aware of how loud her hooves were against the metal floor.
I just found him, and then
She gestured with a huff.
everything's quiet.
Saber's jaw clenched, her lips twitching as she took a deep breath. Another breath, and the shaking of her body drew still. She turned, wings half flared, and fixed Rainbow with a gaze of such intensity that it was all she could do but stare back in open-mouthed shock. "Wait here." Saber breezed past her without waiting for an answer, disappearing into the shadow of her room. She emerged a few seconds later with one blade fastened on her right wing, before dropping the other at Rainbow's hooves. "Put this on." Rainbow blinked, looking down at the perfectly polished steel catching the moonlight below her. Saber never let another pony handle her equipment. Even Flintlock treated her gear with a quiet reverence.
Saber,
"Now!" The mare's voice was nearly as sharp as the blade. Rainbow bent down, strapping the weapon to her left wing in a rush. Saber leaned in, biting on one of the straps around Rainbow's wing and pulling hard until the blade fell snug against her feathers. She spat the strap out with a curt nod before trotting towards the control room without a word. Rainbow followed with a grimace, glancing behind her as their hoofsteps echoed into the darkness lingering at the top of the stairs. The hull groaned around them, sending a shiver down her spine. When they reached the control room door, Saber unfurled her left wing to reveal the crowbar she had tucked underneath. "Cover me." Rainbow nodded, but Saber had already turned away and set the crowbar's teeth into the metal door. A grunt of exertion escaped her as the door slowly began to give. With a shrill screech that nearly made Rainbow's heart stop, one side of the door slid open far enough for a pony to slide through. Saber glanced back and beckoned with a wing before tucking the crowbar against her side again and squeezing through. The wide window at the front of the control room provided an ample supply of pale starlight, painting the room in a dim midnight blue that was a welcome relief from the dark shadows of the hall outside. Rainbow stepped to the side once she entered, putting her back to the wall while Saber trotted down to the control dais.
Saber, what's going on?
Rainbow whispered.
What happened to the ship?
Relic engine's down,
Saber said as she stepped onto the dais.
Intruder must have stolen the power source.
What? Relic?
There was a sound of shifting metal, and Rainbow's eye snapped back to the half-open door. Nothing moved.
The Argo runs off old equestrian magic. No relic, no power.
Saber tugged at a long lever with both hooves, and Rainbow's ears twitched at the staccato clicking of the mechanism.
We can talk more once the ship's clear.
With a soft, barely audible buzz, a dull red light flickered on above the door. Rainbow jumped back as the door suddenly slammed shut.
Whoa!
Reserve steam will keep the doors working, for now,
Saber said, trotting up from the lower level.
Where's Applejack?
Rainbow nodded.
She was sleeping in the cargo hold a few minutes ago.
Good. Let's find the others.
The hiss of the door opening felt far louder without the ship's usual ambience, and it slid open with a series of halting, sluggish jerks that made Rainbow think of a wounded pony dragging herself to safety. A line of dim red lights was set into the top of the hall on the other side, spaced between the moonlit windows and painting the metal in an alternating pattern of dull red and pale blue.
You lead, bottom of the stairs,
Saber said.
I'll watch our six.
Right.
Rainbow stepped forward with a gulp, testing the weight of the blade on her left wing as she went. Distant hoofsteps echoed toward them from the far side of the hall, and for a moment Rainbow thought she could even hear them above and below her. A shadow poked up at the end of the hall.
Who's there?
Rainbow called. She crouched low, straining to make out details in the low light. Were those wingtips raised up behind it? What could she do if it started shooting? Rainbow? You alright? Rainbow let out a relieved sigh as Applejack's voice reached her. There was a thunk like Tartarus a bit ago and all the lights went out. Now what's going on, gal?
Someone's on the ship,
Rainbow explained as they met at the top of the stairs. She reached out and pulled Applejack into a tight hug, careful to keep her wing blade at a safe distance.
I'm glad you're okay.
Well, alright then. Applejack let out a soft chuckle as she rubbed a hoof between Rainbow's wings. What's got y'all, RD? Some pony up and die? Rainbow stiffened, pulling back to look Applejack in the eyes. The cow pony's nervous grin fell from her face, eyes widening. More hoof steps drifted from the shadows at the bottom of the steps. Rainbow put herself between Applejack and the approaching noise, relaxing as she caught sight of star trails and flintlock. Trails came first, the faint blue glow of her magic wrapped around her javelin floating beside her. Flint was scanning the hall behind them with his eyes narrowed. His shotgun was strapped to his side, a string running from the trigger to a collar around his neck. Sea Saber cleared her throat, drawing everyone's attention.
Where's Sunfeather?
She wasn't in her room, Flint said. Didn't see Dusty either.
What's up with the power?
Trails asked.
I've never seen a relic engine just give out like this.
Dusty Tome is dead.
Saber's voice was steady, but the fire in her eyes hadn't lost any of its edge.
An intruder sabotaged the engine.
The silence rushed back into place as Saber's words hung in the air. Trails gaped up at her, her hind legs giving out and allowing her flank to plop against the floor, while Applejack took her hat off with a grimace and glanced into the darkness around her. Flint let out a low growl. Orders? Saber nodded.
We'll mourn later. For now, we need to locate Sunfeather and find the intruder before they accomplish their objectives. We keep to groups of 2 or more. Is the princess safe?
Applejack blinked as she realized the question was addressed to her.
I ain't checked.
Flint, take Applejack and safeguard the princess. I'll be there shortly.
Aye, boss. Come on then, Jackie. The cargo hold door groaned and complained as the reserve steam dragged it half open, giving enough room for Flintlock to lead Applejack through. Sea Saber placed the hoof on the door, holding it open as she turned to face Trails and Rainbow.
Sunfeather probably went down to the engine herself to investigate the malfunction, she said. You two, find her and then meet us back here. She is top priority, then retrieving the relic, and only then catching the intruder. Don't run off alone.
She spoke the last words directly to Rainbow.
Star Trails is in charge. Don't let me down, Rainbow Dash.
She glanced back to Trails.
Understood?
Trails gave a curt nod.
Got it. You can count on us,
Rainbow added.
I know I can.
Saber turned away and disappeared into the shadows of the cargo hold, leaving the two mares alone with the weak steam of the closing door. Trails shot a brief sideways glance at Rainbow and beckoned with her head.
Come on. Watch my back, okay?
Right.
Rainbow couldn't help but grimace as she followed the unicorn down the hall towards the observation room, keeping her eye trained on the shadows behind them. The image of Trails flinching beneath her, raising her hooves to protect her face, was still fresh in her mind, and now Rainbow was following her into the bowels of the ship, searching for whoever had killed Dusty. What had been a 20-second flight took far longer at this pace, giving Rainbow ample time to imagine griffins hiding in every shadow and jump at every distant creak or burst of steam. Rainbow glanced ahead and caught Trails quickly looking away, her ears swiveling forwards. It occurred to her that she should say something before they ended up in a life-or-death situation with only each other to count on.
Hey. Yeah?
Rainbow sighed.
Here goes. I'm sorry. About, you know.
She offered up an awkward chuckle as Trails looked back, only to cut it off with a frustrated grunt.
Not good enough. I'm sorry about losing my cool with you.
After a long moment, Trails nodded and turned her attention forwards once again.
It's fine, Dash. I know it was a rough situation, and I don't blame you for getting upset. Thanks for apologizing.
A few seconds passed.
I'm sorry for avoiding you these past couple days. Yeah.
Rainbow broke out into a relieved grin.
It was kinda awkward back in the cargo hold yesterday.
Trails stopped so abruptly that Rainbow nearly bumped into her. She turned fully, a frown on her face.
Yesterday? Yeah?
Rainbow arched a brow.
You know, when you came into the cargo hold and kinda froze up?
She smirked, laying a comforting hoof on Trails' shoulder.
Hey, it's no big deal, right? Things were still pretty weird, and I don't blame you.
Trails cocked her head.
Dash, I haven't seen you since our fight.
Rainbow blinked.
What? But AJ was there too. She saw you. Dash, whoever you spoke to, that wasn't me.
A cold chill ran down Rainbow's back, sending a shiver through her body. She twisted around, wings fluttering her into a low hover, and peered into the dark hall behind her. The silence was really starting to get to her. Trails spoke up uncertainly.
Hey, you okay?
Shush, Rainbow snapped.
I'm thinking.
The awkward, silent Star Trail she had spoken to a couple days ago wasn't Star Trails. Applejack had been there, so she couldn't have been hallucinating. Had it been a dream? Or maybe... She whirled, pointing a hoof at the other mare.
Have I ever told you the story about how I did a sonic rainboom?
Trails cocked her head.
Dash, you've told me that story like 10 times already. This isn't the time. How many times?
Rainbow pressed.
How many times exactly have I told you that story?
Trails rubbed at her chin with a huff.
3? Am I missing something?
Rainbow nodded, letting her hooves fall to the floor once more. She beckoned Trails close and leaned in to whisper to her ear.
I think a changeling killed Dusty.
Trails stiffened.
What? Think about it. I spoke to a Star Trails, and it wasn't you.
Rainbow bit her lip as she thought back to the past few days.
And Flint cider. There were 2 kegs empty, but no pony on the crew would have drinking any. His helmet was missing, and...
She paused, her mouth going dry.
Like it just walked off. But how would a changeling do all that? Why?
Trails shook her head.
And that still doesn't explain what you saw. It's not like a changeling can just transform into another pony at will.
Rainbow shot her a look. Trails narrowed her eyes.
Wait. Can changelings transform into another pony at will? Of course they can!
Rainbow hissed.
Why do you think they're called changelings? I don't know. I'm not a historian.
Trails shot back.
I thought they were just mutated Canterlot ponies, like sea ponies, but without water. We need to get back,
Rainbow said, turning around.
Saber needs to know. They'll be fine, Dash. There's 3 of them.
Trails stepped in front of her.
But Sunfeather's probably on her own down in the engine, and she isn't a fighter. If that changeling catches her looking like one of us... Right. Let's move. Fast.
They broke out into a trot, closing the distance to the front of the ship at a quick pace. The red emergency light above the rec room door came into sight, beckoning them forwards. Trails came to a stop in front of it, but instead of approaching the door and prompting it open, she turned to face the opposite direction. A small trapdoor was set low into the wall at an angle, reminding Rainbow of the entrance to Applejack's old cellar. The door hung open, swallowing up the dim red light like a hungry monster waiting for prey to wander inside.
We're going down there?
Rainbow asked.
There's a few maintenance tunnels around the ship,
Trails said. She floated her javelin down first, illuminating the surface of the mesh catwalk within.
This one leads to the engine. If anyone wanted to break or fix it, this is where they'd go. Come on.
Rainbow grimaced as she watched Trails squeeze herself through the little hole and step out of sight. Taking a deep breath, she poked her head inside and looked around. The maintenance tunnel was even tighter than she had first thought. The walkway ran between 2 walls of interlocking brass piping, and unlike the rest of the ship, there were no red emergency lights to fend off the darkness. Only the soft glow of Trails' magic lit the way, and even that was mostly blocked by the unicorn's body. Rainbow wasn't even sure if she could get one wing half flared in the little space. How easy would it be for a changeling to jump out of some unseen crevice and rip her throat out while she struggled to even bring her weapon to bear? She shook herself, dislodging the bloody image.
Come on, Rainbow,
she muttered.
You're not afraid of a little tunnel, are you? You're gonna take more than 2 walls to stop the most awesome pony in Equestria. Yeah.
She eased herself through the trapdoor as she spoke, trying not to cringe at the way her feathers brushed against both walls as she followed after Trails. The mesh of the catwalk trembled under hoof, and looking down past it, Rainbow caught brief glimpses of clockwork gears catching the light from Trails' horn. She didn't realize she had been holding her breath until they reached the end of the tunnel, coming out into a small but busy room filled with steel gears and brass tubing. A single red emergency light was set into the floor, throwing shadows upwards against the 2 boilers running along the top of the room. A platform inscribed with arcane runes was set against the far wall, surrounded by strange instruments and symbols made from a grainy white material that Rainbow could not recognize. The space above it was conspicuously empty.
Oh, well, that confirms that,
Trails said.
Relic's gone, but hopefully not far. Now we just need to find Sunfeather.
The sound of approaching hooves echoed out of another narrow maintenance tunnel. This one in one of the far corners, and both mares pointed their weapons towards it. A second later, another set of hooves became audible from a different maintenance tunnel, opposite the corner the first one was in. Rainbow and Trails exchanged a brief glance, and Rainbow adjusted to face the other direction.
There's an intruder on this ship,
Sunfeather said as she stepped out of the first tunnel. She had a tool bag perched on her back, and her silver mane and gray coat were both smudged with stains of recent work. Trails breathed a sigh of relief.
We know. He got dusty. There's an intruder on the ship,
Sunfeather said as she stepped out of the second tunnel. This one's tool bag was a different color, and the stains in her coat and mane had a different pattern to them.
Oh, fuck,
Trails muttered, pointing her javelin at the second Sunfeather as it locked to the other with mild interest.
What the fuck? Quick, ask them something only the real Sunfeather would know,
Rainbow hissed. She stood sideways to both of them, holding one wing blade out in front of her.
We're not that close,
Trails hissed back.
We barely talk. I'll save you the trouble,
the first Sunfeather droned, her voice carrying all the energy of a mare reviewing her taxes.
I came down to investigate the power outage and I saw that thing.
She pointed at the other Sunfeather.
Messing with the relic. I chased it into the maintenance tunnels, but I lost track of it.
The second Sunfeather blinked.
I'll save you the trouble,
she began, voice filled with the excitement of a mare who had just finished sorting her laundry.
I came down.
Trails' javelin lashed out at the second one. It let out a shrill screech as green flames burst from its body, and the revealed changeling ducked under the strike before leveling its glowing horn on its attacker. Trails threw herself to the side just as a beam of glimmering green energy shot forth, striking the pipe beneath her with a loud crack. Hot steam burst out of the pipe, the hiss joined by a strained curse from Star Trails, and Rainbow raised a wing to protect her face from the heat as she flinched back. By the time the steam dissipated enough for her to lower her wing, the changeling was gone. Sunfeather was bent over Trails, who lay on the floor nursing an apparent wound on her flank.
Fuck, that's hot!
Trails spat through clenched teeth.
It ran off,
Sunfeather shouted, looking to the tunnel that led back to the rest of the ship.
It still has the relic!
Rainbow went to give chase, but she hesitated. Saber's words were still clear in her mind.
Don't run off alone. Star Trails is in charge. Don't let me down, Rainbow Dash.
She looked to Trails, the question clear in her mind.
Just go!
Trails waved her off with a huff.
If it gets away, we're dead in the air!
With a nod, Rainbow galloped into the tunnel. She caught just a brief glimpse of the changeling jumping out the trapdoor at the end, and wasted no time in pouring on the speed, her hooves pounding against the wire mesh beneath her. She shot out into the hall with a challenging shout, but nothing rose up to meet her. The sound of the changeling's hooves seemed to come from both directions at once, growing fainter, and with a frustrated growl, Rainbow picked one at random and spread her wings. The hall blurred past, the alternating red and blue flashing in her eyes a dozen times in 10 seconds, before she drew up short in front of the cargo hold door. The changeling turned to the opposite corner at the same time, and as it skidded to a stop, Rainbow got her first good look at it. She had seen plenty of changelings in her life, both during the siege of Canterlot 1,000 years ago and in the pockmarked streets of its ruins a millennia later. They always appeared misshapen, either with limbs too long and spindly for their barrels, or chests bulging with unnatural muscle, their chitin often cracked and warped from the vain effort of trying to contain their bodies. But this one appeared almost normal, if not for the bloody claws sticking out of its hooves like nails that had been pounded into its skin, the curling fangs jutting out past its muzzle in every direction, or the heavy edge of chitin running along its tattered gossamer wings. It could have easily been one of the cackling creatures that had invaded Kennerlot so long ago. It was the appearance that made her hesitate. She raised a hoof, putting as much force into her voice as she could.
Stop!
It hissed at her, seizing the opportunity to fire a bolt of blazing green fire in her direction. She yelped as she ducked the shot, catching a brief glimpse of the monster bounding up the steps to the upper-level hallway.
Oh no, you don't!
She gave chase with a flap of her wings, cresting the stairs just in time to see the changeling dart through the still-open door of the clinic. Rainbow darted into the clinic without hesitation, her bladed wing raised high and a war cry on her lips. The changeling was nowhere to be seen. She scanned the room, breathing hard. Dusty's body was still splayed out in the same place, and aside from a few loose tools rolling around, the room was empty. She frowned as she noticed the tool bag the changeling had been carrying resting on the counter. She took a step forwards. Green fire flickered behind her, followed by her own voice.
Oh no, you don't!
Rainbow whipped around, bringing her bladed wing up just barely in time to catch her doppelganger's own wing coming down. She blinked, eye widening as her blade got caught in the outer feathers instead of slicing through with ease, doing little more than drawing a few beads of green ichor. For a fraction of an instant, Rainbow stared into a reflection of her own face, the space where her eye patch should be, replaced with a smooth expanse of unbroken cyan fur. The changeling's one fiery Ceres eye glared down at her, held back only by the clashing wings and loose strands of prismatic mane. Rainbow's lips curled back in a furious snarl. She shoved the changeling back, throwing it against the window above Dusty's body.
Stop copying me! Stop copying me!
The changeling shot back. Green fire raced over its form as it jumped upwards, crashing through a closed grate in the ceiling.
And stop running!
Rainbow shouted, crouching down to give chase. She paused, glancing behind her to the tool bag the changeling had left behind. A faint white glow drifted up from its innards, casting strange, twisting symbols against the wall behind it. She knew she shouldn't give chase. She had saved the relic, and the smart thing would be to bring it back to the rest of the crew, share what she had found out, and then make a plan to take it out together. But that thing had the audacity to mock her with her own face. She already knew where it was, and she was the most awesome pony in Equestria. She had taken out plenty of changelings before, and Dusty's body was right there, staring at her as if begging for someone to avenge him. She flapped her wings, tucking them against her sides and shooting through the remains of the grate. She came out into near total darkness, the dim red light spilling up from the clinic outlining the shape of a ladder before her. The motion of the air around her feathers told her that she was still inside, but this space was bigger than any other she'd seen on the Argo. She followed the ladder up, turning slow circles and squinting into the darkness, until it ended at a mesh catwalk.
Ugh, another one of these?
Rainbow settled gingerly onto the catwalk, her bladed wing held out in front of her as she crept further away from the dull red beam, ears straining to make out any noise between every step.
Come on out, little changeling.
Her own voice echoed back to her from the dark.
Come on out, little changeling. Okay, that's creepy.
Rainbow's ears twitched at the sound of rustling fabric to her side. Sickly green light flared up in front of her. She squinted into the brightness, catching a brief glimpse of the changeling on the catwalk in front of her and round, bulbous shapes that seemed to float on either side like dark clouds. And then she threw herself into the air as a bolt of green fire raced toward her, splashing against the metal where she had just been, standing with a crackling hiss. The afterimage of the room was still burned in her vision when the changeling pounced. Rainbow lashed out towards the sound with her wing. Rushing wind tugged at her mane as the changeling hissed into her ear, and she turned the strike into a spinning slash at the air below her before twisting around to land on her hooves. The changeling had landed behind her, the red beam of light from the clinic grate outlining it in a hazy silhouette that seemed to bleed into the surrounding emptiness when it moved. She gave ground as its heavy wings beat against her defense, praying to Celestia that the catwalk wouldn't suddenly end behind her. She ducked a swipe from one of the changeling's wings, wincing at the sound of tearing canvas behind her. Starlight streamed into the room, picking out the changeling's form in detail, and Rainbow seized the opportunity to shoot back up with a fearsome shout, striking the changeling's chest with both forelegs and sending it falling off the catwalk with a pained shriek. Rainbow barely had time to catch her breath before blasts of green fire began spewing up from the darkness under the catwalk. She yelped as she took to the air, dodging each attack with quick flutters of her wings. Twinkling beams of moonlight crisscrossed the wide room as each bolt blew a new hole in the walls, picking out the metal skeleton that lined the edges and the floating canvas balloons lining the catwalk in neat rows. Rainbow stole a glance at the changeling as she ducked behind one balloon, spotting it perched on a metal beam that ran along the bottom of the long, cylindrical room. Her eyes widened as the next blast popped the balloon she'd hid behind, throwing her back in a wild spin. Rainbow cried out as she tore through the canvas wall, falling into the open air outside the Argo and arresting her spin just in time to avoid gutting herself on the sharp metal blades of one of its massive propellers. She shook herself, regaining her bearings, and looked back to the hole she'd left in the Argo's balloon envelope. The envelope was in tatters, with loose flaps of canvas fluttering in the ocean wind, and moonlight reflecting off the exposed surface of the metal skeleton inside. Rainbow didn't know much about airship engineering, but she knew that the balloon was what kept it up, and she had to put a stop to this fight before the changeling caused so much damage that the ship could no longer maintain altitude. She set her jaw as she flew out in a wide arc, aiming to pierce the canvas near the bottom of the balloon where she remembered the changeling to be. The tearing of the canvas screamed in her ears as she punched through to the inside, bringing a new beam of starlight that picked out the changeling crouched low on the balloon skeleton, its eyes still fixed on where it had last seen her. It turned with an odd, strangled shriek that Rainbow could only think of as shocked, bringing a grin to her face.
Gotcha.
She slammed into it with both hooves, bearing it to the ground and dragging the back of its armored shell across the metal with her momentum. It hissed its defiance at her, disappearing in a flash of cold green fire, and glaring up at her with her own face contorted in fury. She snarled as she raised a hoof, stomping hard against one wing and wrenching it backwards with a wet snap that sent it scream up an octave. With her blade, she stabbed through the chitin at the base of its other wing, wrenching the tip in the wound and shooting a spurt of green blood against her bared teeth. Spittle flew into Rainbow's face as the changeling screamed up at her, the sharp claws on its hooves digging into her belly. She screamed back in fury as much as in pain, rolling to the side and off the edge of the thin metal girder they were fighting on. Both of them tumbled through the envelope and back into open air. Rainbow kicked it loose, hissing as the claws tore more flesh loose on the way out, and caught herself on her wings. The changeling's wings, however, were mangled beyond use. It shrieked up at her as she watched it plummet into the night, its ragged voice growing steadily fainter, until finally she couldn't pick its dark chitin out from the ocean any longer. She thought she might have heard a splash, but she couldn't be sure it wasn't just the ocean swells. With a groan, Rainbow pushed her hooves up against the twin gashes in her belly, wincing with every breath. The warm ocean air tickled at her tongue, its salt mixing in with the bitter tang of the changeling's thick blood. She fluttered back towards the envelope with gritted teeth, straining against the sudden ache in her wings. She blinked, and suddenly she was back on the catwalk.
Where am I? Right. Changeling.
She limped toward the warm red light that highlighted the ladder back to Dusty Tom's clinic.
He can fix me up. I'll be fine.
She blinked again, gasping as she fell through the open grate and back into the clinic. She bounced off the bed with a grunt, rolling to a stop on the floor. She'd landed in something wet and oddly warm. With a moan, she looked to the side and saw Dusty's body gaping at her as if in shock. She choked out a bitter laugh.
Right. He's dead. Pony feathers.
Rainbow pulled her dry lips apart, pushing the words out as hard as she could.
AJ! I'm up here!
She paused to suck in a breath, dragging herself towards the open door to the hall.
Trails! Saber!
She didn't remember the door being so far away last time. Her head fell against the floor with an irritated grunt.
This better not be my blood.
Darkness began to drip in along the corners of her sight. She really hated that. She rolled onto her back with her lips twisted into a determined grimace.
I'm not going to die. It takes more than one changeling to kill Rainbow Dash.
Was that the sound of hooves approaching? The buzzing in her ears was too loud for her to be sure. As the black tendrils crept over her vision, Rainbow imagined she was resting on a soft bed of clouds.